It's easy to understand. It just takes practice. So you do have to consciously practice to make the conscious choices to not go one way all the time. So you'll see it, like my family of origin's quite, fallen apart. Like none of us are really connected too well, because unless you're all really wanting to come together to practice this type of change, it's just, you're just going to get dragged.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be dragged anymore. Like I've spent a lot of decades in my life feeling that, and I don't need that anymore.
Welcome to Conversations with Kristi. I'm Kristi McVie, a former WA police officer, specialist child interviewer and child abuse detective. For years I worked on the front lines investigating child sexual abuse, where I saw the risks, the patterns, and most importantly, the ways that we can protect our kids. Now I'm here to share that knowledge with you. This podcast is all about real conversations, giving parents, carers and educators the tools to keep their kids safe, both in person and online. Through survivor stories, expert insights and practical advice, we'll navigate these tough topics together so you feel informed, confident and empowered. Because when we know better, we can do better, and our kids deserve nothing less. Content warning. Some topics and conversations can be triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised, as your mental health is important. Please refer to my website and the show notes for available support services.
Hello and welcome back to the Conversations with Kristi podcast. I am so excited to be talking to the wonderful Susan Dunlop. Oh my gosh. I have had 2 podcasts today and I can't speak now. And of course, we've been talking flat out before we started press record. And here I am. I now can't even speak, but that's great. I'm really excited to talk to you, Susan, because I know that you've got some really important insights into what child development, especially, but how we can recognize some of the signs of not only if a child's being abused, but also when we are on the other side of it, when we're trying to heal, and how we play certain roles in that. But thank you so much for being here. We have had the longest chat before we press record, and I was like, we better press record. We're never going to get this done. But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, bit of a half-hour session before the session.
Sometimes it's like that. And I love that we can have those chats, but sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like talking way too much. But this is about you, Susan, not about me today. But tell me, like, for the listeners who are going to go, who's this Susan Dunlop? Say Dunlop. I can't speak. Who is this Susan Dunlop person? Can you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Susan Dunlop. I live in Noosa in Queensland, Australia, and I've been a leader in business. I train self-leadership. And before all of that, I left Sydney with my 3 young children to come and live someplace beautiful. And way back before that, I lived in just common old suburban Sydney in a Catholic family home, did all the usual stuff in the 60s, 70s, 80s, as most of us know. And unfortunately, we had abuse in our family. So I'm lived experience of that. I think in Australia, you call it harmful sexual behaviour.
Yeah.
So I decided at one stage in 2011 that I would become a voice in the silent landscape of sibling sexual abuse, because no one talks about it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if no one's going to talk about it, I'm old enough and wise enough to say something. And so I explored it as much as I possibly could. I researched it, and I've learned a lot. And in the learning, that help comes healing. And now I'm on the other side of that to advocate and make change.
Yeah. And I think there's many different phases to the healing. There's that I don't want to tell anyone. I don't want anyone to know that this has happened to me. I just want to get on with my life. And I saw that in children as well, but I saw that in, historical survivors of abuse, of all different types of abuse. And then there's that phase where you go, I really do want to talk about this. I need people to know what's happened to me, because it's there's shame or guilt involved, or there's also it's framed who I am. And so, there's so many like different phases to, abuse healing and abuse survival and all of that stuff. But one of the things that I found really interesting in when we've had conversations is how much you know about child development around this, and how much you can see, you do it really well in speaking about the developmental differences of what happens when you have been abused, or any type of abuse, not just sexual abuse, but any type of abuse. So how do you think that understanding the development of children plus, how does that show up in your own life as an adult? Where does that come from? How did, I guess, you mentioned that your lived experience, you've got lived experience, but where did it show up for you, and what's changed over the years as you've gone through it?
It's definitely, as you were saying earlier, is that keeping everything held in tight for a long time, because I remember thinking, if I let it out, what's going to come out? What's happening? I don't know what I'm going to find. And I didn't want to find it because I was busy being a young mum. And then I was busy moving to another state and then busy building a company. And I didn't want anyone to see me with those masks down, I suppose, that I was keeping in place. So I didn't have time to fall apart. And I believe from the work I do, I know there's a readiness for change. There's a readiness to approach things. And it's okay for us not to be ready as we move through. Talking about children, though, I've definitely learnt there's the connection between being stalked in your own home, having no safety in your own home, definitely has an impact on you, where, we hear people talk about the fight, flight, freeze response. Usually you're talking about that on a one-off occasion. But when it's in your house and you don't know when it's going to happen, and if it's, it was over a few years, it could happen any time of day, anywhere you were, at your house, on holidays, at your grandparents, anywhere. I had that, basically my adrenal reflex was switched on all the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. So there's always that undercurrent of that. And I brought that through into the way I operated then as an adult, like busy girl, just always doing stuff. So I could see that. And I think when you get to take the moment to go back and really have a look and walk back through everything, you sort of feel that compassion for the child.
Yeah.
And you can see that it shapes the silence that you were in, the shame that you had back then, the feeling that you were the only person. That doesn't go away. It takes a really long time. It's a bit like that Robin Williams, I think is it in Good Will Hunting. There's like a meme that goes around and he's talking to the young fellow in that, and he keeps saying to, what did he say? He says, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And he keeps repeating it. And I think even now, I'm in my 50s, you need that repeated to you, unfortunately, lots of times, because of some reason back there, self-blame kicked in. And I can blame myself about anyone else's issues anytime. Somehow I did something about that.
Oh my gosh, I know. And I can relate, not from the sexual abuse perspective or from like that, but I can relate from the fact that emotional, psychological, physical abuse, it was my fault. I was a bad child. I was a bad this. I was a bad that. So, when we look at it from that perspective, you can just imagine what we carry through to adulthood. I know what we carry through to adult. You know what we carry through. But I feel it's not until we slow down through parenthood, because we have to focus on our children, and then it kind of like comes and slaps you upside the head and goes, hello, here's your trauma to deal with.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but that's what happens for a lot of people.
I definitely had it with, I started a company that it grew so much. I just pictured I was going to run a lifestyle business, filling nursing agency shifts, sitting at the beach, sitting at the kids' sports carnivals. And my phones ended up ringing from 5 a.m. until 11 p.m. at night, 7 days a week. It's a great adrenal business, must say, because I had to fill shifts really fast all the time.
Because you didn't need any more adrenal overload.
I was good at it. Definitely was good at it. So I was doing all of that, but underneath there was always this feeling of me being awkward, being different. And it didn't take until after I sold that company, really, to connect the dots. And I feel, as I've said it a few times, that I feel like it's almost like you just don't see yourself. How I put it, it's like there's this person that was being who I was, and now I can see it from a wisdom space. I could, that was trauma. That was you proving yourself to your parents that you could do it.
Yeah.
But that didn't serve you anymore after a while, so you had to stop that. And then I went into my next evolution as a leader. So I was learning self-development and all of that. And so then I would step up through that. But there was definitely the part that goes back to the childhood that really was hard to ever shift, was that avoidant thing in me, and needing to fly. And I remember when I first saw my psychologist, she went, so you're a flight risk, are you? But, yep, I'm gone. If I can go, I'm gone. So I had to bring that into perspective and see it in me, and that was a really good thing to do for myself.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I remember because my parents separated really young, and my mum left when I was 6, 7. I was with my dad and my stepmom and stuff like that, and how that manifested out in so I had an abandonment trauma.
Yeah.
As you do, as you would. And because I had no contact with my mum for years. And I got married quite young. I've been with my husband for a long time. And when I was in my early 20s, I remember we went to marriage counselling because I was planning my exit every 5 seconds. I was like, and I would say things to him like, well, when we get divorced, you know, we were married maybe a year and I was talking about leaving and breaking up and all of this stuff. So I was already, and I've been doing that my whole life, planning my exit. And it wasn't until I sat with it and went, I'm still with him. We're together nearly 30 years. But it was so crazy that I think I sound similar to what you're saying about that moving away from pain. I'll leave before they hurt me kind of thing.
Yeah. And we had abandonment in our family generationally as well, which I felt so much for the people who experienced that in the generations before me. But I hadn't pieced it together as me not having that support. You know, there's that betrayal or denial and, you know, inaction that you go through after a bad disclosure, say, that you think, I was abandoned.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think because I was ready to do the work at the time it hurt a lot, but then you could actually sit with it. You could sit and go, okay, so what can I do about this now? What can I learn about it? What can I give myself as a ritual or a way of processing it, just to be able to let it hurt a little bit less every day and then move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece. Like I kind of get a bit trapped in that we talk about, you know, I'm talking about prevention constantly, prevention. But there's so many people probably who listen to this podcast or follow me where unfortunately it's happened. Something's happened. They haven't been able to prevent it. And they're stuck in this place of like, well, what do I do now? How do I help my child or my family or how do I, hopefully they've been protective and hopefully they've done something and they've removed the risk factor, the person who's harming. If not, what do I do next? And so I guess from my perspective and talking about child development, you mentioned in your work, you talk about child development and you talk about certain protection strategies and certain things that we can, how does it play out and stuff like that. So can you just go through some of the stuff that you've learned in your long career, long history, I hate saying that word, but, what have you learnt about all of this stuff and where do you see, what am I trying to say, Kristi? Come on, get with it. What can you impart with parents or people listening?
Well, I'll talk to it from what I had to find out for myself that I didn't realise, okay? So because I'm talking about that, I was the flight risk. So you've got fight, flight, freeze. And when I first became, I'm now a 3 Vital Questions certified facilitator, okay? So it's a leadership model in America. And in the curriculum that I took myself through first, because I needed to do it to see what was left over for me from how I'd been operating in life. I found in one of the first few modules this part that really just stuck with me, and it was psychologist Karen Horney back in the 1940s. She connected the dots of that. The work we do is called the drama triangle, and the drama triangle is we go to these default roles in times of stress, okay? So we otherwise... And I'm not talking about being the victim of abuse. I'm talking about the state of victimhood, okay, or mindset of victimhood. So we otherwise go into the role of victim and, feel sorry for ourselves, feel bad, stuff's always happening to me, all that type of thing. Or you can go into the persecutor role, that you're going to fight, that you're going to prove yourself, or you're going to go into the rescuer role. And a lot of us go into the rescuer role. That's really one of the most common ones people say they're used to. But what Karen Horney did, she sort of pieced it together. So she said key protection strategies are moving away, so the child will isolate. If I withdraw, I'm going to be safe. And moving against is the child controls. So if I dominate, I stay in charge. So that's your bully and all of that.
Yeah.
Moving towards is the child pleases. So if I'm helpful, I'll be loved. So they match with Dr. Stephen Cartman, who created the drama triangle in the 60s before I was born. He created the roles of victim, persecutor and rescuer, and their roles. Okay, so we aren't a persecutor, we aren't a victim, and we aren't a rescuer. We play the roles of them because it helps us get through these times. So I found it really interesting that psychologist Karen did this in the 40s and then, Dr. Stephen said this in the 60s. And it just made me feel at peace. It's like, wow, that's what my family was like. We had this chaotic family that, it was out of my mother's control. She had no experience of having siblings. She was a single child. Dad was a single child. And they brought up 4 children in a reasonably unharmonious marriage. Money stresses in the 60s, 70s, all of that, having to work, not be around, and then giving, the eldest son the responsibility of being in charge of siblings.
And a lot of families were like that.
Yeah, none of it's ideal. So
no, a lot of families were doing that too in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we're seeing less kids and if we look at today, it's not so much that we're leaving kids unsupervised, but we're leaving them now on devices, which is a whole other thing. But it seems like, and I said this earlier in another podcast, it seems like there was this, this absent parenting, we had so many absent parents. They weren't parenting unless they had to, and if they had to, it was coming down on you like a hammer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was no guidance.
No. And my daughter, the youngest daughter, she calls it transactional communication. And I think that's what it was, I reckon. It's okay, I've got to ask you, have you done your homework? Good. Have you got your uniform out? Great. Okay. Have you made the dinner? No. All right. So the transactions of the day take priority, and then I think people haven't got the bandwidth to keep their presence with the child longer than that a lot of the time. And I think there was no presence. That was really the issue. Mum wasn't happy, and I think she wasn't present. So, and it's funny, I know I will say mum, but dad probably was the same. But I think because mum was in the home more.
Yeah.
So I feel that the lack of presence hasn't changed. Parents don't model any better behaviour by the way they're sitting on their devices just as much as the kids are. So,
I think
distracted.
Also, you're distracted, but I think it's also we can't, just because our kids are I was laughing about the fact that once upon a time it was see you at dark, and I could have been running the local drug ring or whatever, and my parents wouldn't have had a clue, right? And I laugh about that now. It was a great childhood in some respects, but then, if anything serious happened, we didn't go to our parents about it because we knew we would be the ones who were in trouble for something that had happened to us, which was outside of our control.
Yeah.
That modelling of parenting hasn't helped us get to be set up for parenting today. And unless we make actual changes, which is what you're talking about in that system, that drama triangle, when we realise which part we play, that persecutor, victim and rescuer part, it's why we've got parents who enable their children to, hurt other people. It's why we protect our kids when they're the bully. It's why we don't do what we're meant to do, which is lead our children to be better people so that they can be good adults.
And I see there's a lot of work being done with people saying communicate with your children, talk to them about this, talk to them about that. But if you look back up what you just said, if you're looking back into my parents' generation or even my generation, I wasn't good at communicating either. As a parent, I did better than what my mother did. I was much more in my daughter's spaces, but I can't say I was great at it because my parents weren't great. Her parents weren't great. His parents weren't great. So there's a lot of just being okay and having some self-compassion, I think, in the fact that that's just the way it was. But the work I do is about making conscious choice, and it takes practice to make the conscious choice. So it's about looking at what you're doing by default, and you'll start to see it all the time. You'll see yourself playing the victim, the persecutor, or the rescuer.
And you can play it all in one go too.
It's crazy. And once I saw it, I would walk into my office and just pick what was going on. And then it also made me relax, thinking, oh, they're doing that. That's okay. I understand what that's about. And then I could see me doing it. And I had to find ways of see things as they are was my motto as a business owner. I was see things as they are, not worse than they are. Yep. And that would just let me take the next step without going down a drama triangle, spiral into the floor.
Yeah, okay. So when you talk about the drama triangle, if you explain that a little bit more, because what I'm interested in with all of this stuff is you're saying that, so as a child, so if we look at a child's response to abuse, for instance, and we'll just touch on generalized ideas, if I would withdraw, I'll be safe. So this is a child who might have been really active in a sport or with a person who they loved them because they were being groomed or whatever, and then all of a sudden they just pull themselves away and they pull themselves out of the family, pull themselves out of the situation. They're withdrawing from you. They might have been really constantly chatty to you. So that's when we would see that, would you say?
I think it's, as I said, it's not about the state of the actual victim of an abuse situation.
Right.
It's a mindset thing.
Mindset afterwards.
Yeah. So the mindset is, well, why me? Why is this always happening to me? And it makes you fall into that space of the victim role. I think in our work we talk about you go from victimization to victim, and then you can move up through to the healthy alternative, which is the conscious work.
I got that.
Yeah. So it's not...
I've been there.
It's not as simple as being the connection
in
to the
moment.
Actual thing.
But I reckon I can see that I can actually see that also in when children react and when things are going on in the home. When you said the difference, so the moving away, moving against and moving towards, like we talk about fawning, right?
Yeah.
And fawning is very much that moving toward. And we don't talk about it enough in that when, we talk about fight and flight, but the fawning part is when you're used to, you that by being that helpful person or being that people pleaser, that you will not be at a bigger target. And so I can see those three things in when abuse happens as well.
Yeah. They're actually they are our adrenal responses, aren't they? They're the thing that you go into. So the freeze is something I'm definitely talking about in the conversations that we're having in the conversation cafe I run, that most of us talk about how we can't remember a lot of the stuff when we fell into that freeze space. But I think, there's the drama triangle is heavy on us. It's exhausting to play as well. Yeah. So when you're actually doing it, it's not fun. It's not good. It's about... What I came to understand was it's about avoiding some of the harder emotions that are part of something. And I learnt in my, trauma-informed coach certification, they were talking about how we humans leave trauma loops open because we don't know how to close them out like an animal would when they're being chased.
Okay,
they actually go the whole cycle, where we don't know how to stay with a heavy emotion and close it. So we don't end up...
It just keeps spiraling, keeps going, coming around. Yeah. You think and then you're back again. I've done that work. I've had that conversation when I was recovering from working in the police and PTSD. Yeah. I remember saying this out loud to my husband. I've already fucking dealt with this. I thought this was done. Yeah. Why is this coming up again?
So it comes up as triggered. So that's the thing. It's like what was really interesting to learn was like there's a problem will come up or something will be coming up, and it triggers off a heavy emotion, and it's usually a past memory of someone doing something in the past, and it makes you just go straight into, oh, that's so annoying, or that's really bothering me. And you think, okay, so how am I going to fix this? So you start running around to sort out the problem, with a quick fix. And then because your emotions start to change, like the heaviness of that emotion can start to shift because you're thinking, it's going away. You actually don't close that cycle. So if you can be kind to yourself and sit with the emotion a bit longer, like when you said, this has happened before, you think, wow, what's this coming? What is it? And actually have stayed with it. I think that's the gift of it, is to stay with the emotions longer. And it's not normal for us. None of us have given ourselves time to do that, or, we haven't had a parent say, just sit there with your hand on your heart and see what's coming up for you right now,
No, we haven't. And we avoid, like, as a society, we avoid big emotions. We avoid anger. We avoid sadness. We avoid, and we avoid it all the time because it's hard.
And vulnerability, vulnerability is a big thing to lean into.
Yeah. And even people I feel safe with, I hate being seen as vulnerable. And because I'm the rescuer, I was the ultimate rescuer. I went into a police officer's role to rescue everyone else. And so, I take it, I have to be forced to be looked after. People have to force me. I became hyper independent. But, when I have healed the most is when when I've had time to actually sit with it and be in it. Yeah. I think we have to feel it to feel it to heal it. So yeah, I totally
That's what
get
it's about.
that.
It's actually about feeling it. So I think if you applied all the words that feel the drama way, you've got so many words you could apply to that, and they're all heavy, and they're, I've taken a whole school staff through this, and they're in Hong Kong, and some of the people were saying over there that just their normal family dynamics is just full on drama. It is the three roles just constantly. She said, no wonder I come to work so exhausted on a Monday. So just acknowledging that our personal lives are like that. So that actually impacts how you show up then in your work, and, and also then how you show up with your kids. So you're modeling that all the time, and our parents modeled that to us. And the media, the shows on TV, everything is modelling that way of being. It's the default. So we all can relate to that really well, where trying to choose a conscious way forward is not quite the normal.
As easy.
So,
and it's not as easy. It takes work. It takes acknowledging that's what's happening.
yeah.
I often say to people, or I've said it to my husband, is it me? Am I creating this? And sometimes by just saying that, I'm like, just checking, like putting the thermometer into my life. And, some people really are fueled by drama, so they just keep creating it. But it's, like you said, it's a trauma response, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of
and
the
in
many.
our world, we actually, the fellow who founded the work I do, he had permission from Dr. Cummin to rename it the dreaded drama triangle. So it's DDT, as in toxic. Because if you do live it, if you don't just go to it in times of need, like when the adrenal thing kicks in, if you're living it, it becomes quite destructive.
Oh,
it's not
so
good for your
destructive.
relationships at all. So I mean, like a workplace with this going on, not good.
Horrendous.
A family with it going on, not great. So if you can see that it's there is and know that you're doing it, you get to choose whether you do it or not. It's not like you don't have a choice. You do have a choice.
So how do you identify whether you're in the drama triangle? If you've never heard of it before and you're wondering, like, why is this always happening and why am I always in this space? Or maybe you don't even realise you are. How do you identify it? Is there any questions you can ask yourself or anything you can identify in what you're doing or what's happening?
Well, I would say you can tell by how are you reactive? Are you needing to get things done straight away? So that's reactionary. Or are you taking a time to stop and think before you choose what you need to do? So to me, being reactionary, playing the victim role, the thoughts will be like, life's happening to me, poor me, you feel helpless, you're feeling victimized, discounted. The type of behaviours involved are you're going to be reacting, you're going to give up, and you don't have much energy. And then there's the persecutor is when you're feeling like I've got to win, I know best.
Got to have the last word? Is that one?
Defensive, on guard, that you're discounted, so you have to lash out, that you're self-righteous, you dominate and you control. And basically what I remember when I first heard about that is about putting down versus building someone up.
Yeah.
So that's a feeling of what a persecutor's like. And if someone's talking to you in a real persecutor way or acting that way, to me, it feels harsh at you. So they're feeling harsh. And the rescuer is, I must save others from harm. And if I do good, I'll be worthy. It's telling people, not asking them. It's, I feel sorry for them, poor victim, fears not being needed, feels superior to the victim. And when they jump in to save the day, the trick is that you're going to sacrifice yourself. You're going to say, oh, of course I'll stay back and do that. But you don't want to, but you're going to do it. And often what the problem with the rescuer role turns out to be is no one likes being the victim. And if you treat someone like the victim, if you say, that's all right, I'll do it for you, generally that person doesn't really appreciate that, and you start to feel unappreciated, and then you feel like the victim. So rescuer moves to victim role. Victim seems to turn into a persecutor by accident because that's what happened, and you start moving around the roles again. So you start shifting around. So you'll know it. There's a book that's actually the origin book of this work is called The Power of TED, like as in TED Talk, but TED, by David Emerald. And it's only like a 3-hour read or 3-hour listen. And everyone, we do this as our foundational book for the work I do. And everyone who listens to it or reads it says, I feel like he was talking about me. Yeah, so did I.
Well, people who go into these sorts of roles are generally people who felt like they weren't being supported or, it's very common for people who were victims of abuse as children to become, people who help other people. And
And David and I spoke about developmental trauma because I was doing my coach's course while he and I were having chats. And he's like, the Western way is not the best way to do things. Is it the way we were raised or, the abandonment piece and all of that's all part of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And what do you reckon? Yeah, well, that is really good. You gave some good examples there because I was like, and I was smiling and nodding and like going, oh no, because I have been all of those at one stage in my life or against my husband or my daughter or like hand on heart, not intentional, but we fall into that triangle very quickly and easily.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the tools. No one's taught us. No one's shared that with us before. So I think that's really important to know. And I think, if you don't know about it, it's something that you can learn about. And we don't walk around wanting to harm each other and harm ourselves, and we don't walk around with this. There's very few of us who want to actually hurt the people we love.
But I just picture in my work, I think I was asked the vision of what I would like to do with this work when I became a trainer in it back years ago, 2021, I finally got my certification. And so I'd love to bring this to school kids and to parents, because what happened in my household wouldn't have happened if I had been shown to be self-empowered as a child. And all you people are doing amazing work. Like you're talking about consent and the body parts and all of that. You're actually making a change that none of us had. So I think the world is changing in that space, though I do hear then that stats are showing that, abuse is still happening, and
of course,
now we're moving into other types of, like the porn stuff's become bigger than it used to be and all that.
Of course.
But I just sort of feel
it evolves.
Yeah. And I think if we can at least see ourselves and own that we're being like this as parents, as teachers, and start to practice modelling the tools or the more conscious way, your kids are going to pick up on that so quickly. If you're doing it with authenticity.
With my own child.
Yeah. If you start being real, present, vulnerable, saying, oh gosh, sorry, can I just start again? I think I might just do a do-over of that. I just sounded a bit victim-y right then, didn't I? And if they know you're talking the language, it makes it a beautiful, new, empowered language that you all do talk. And then everyone feels okay to screw it up and to come back and go, oh, I'm going to give that another try. Gosh, I'm having a bad day. I wonder why I'm being like that. What made me do that? What made me come down on them? What was it in me? Because it's in you, usually what's made you come down on someone else, So, so I needed it for me, is all I'm saying. I needed this to make a change in myself,
You just made me think about, there's an amazing First Nations, what would I call them, organisation in the Northern Territory called Hoops for Health. And I learned about this organisation at a conference that I was speaking at, and they came in and talked about their program. And so Hoops for Health is about playing basketball, but it's not about playing basketball. They use the basketball as an in to talk to young people, kids, community, people at risk. But they go into prisons and they talk about, so they're playing basketball with people in prison, and they're talking about emotional intelligent terms, and they're using emotional intelligent terms, and they're talking about this, like these things like the drama triangle or anyways. So but whilst they're doing it, they're bouncing the ball, and they're all mimicking, like they're all bouncing their ball, which mimics the heart and which and then they have a yarning circle. Anyway, the most amazing things are happening in that the adults that are involved, and it's mostly males, but the adults that are involved in this, that are in the prisons, are talking about how they don't want to pass this on to their kids. Yeah. They don't want to pass this lack of empathy and lack of understanding and lack of all of the things. They want to change it for their kids because they don't want their kids to go through what they've gone through. And so the thing is that when we talk from that vulnerable place and we share those vulnerable shares and we give them the language that we didn't have, then it changes the game. It changes the whole landscape around this. Yeah. And we have that opportunity. All of us have that opportunity.
That's what I felt like. And I remember the founders saying, it's easy to understand. It just takes practice. So you do have to consciously practice to make the conscious choices to not go one way all the time. So you'll see it, like my family of origin's quite, fallen apart. Like none of us are really connected too well, because unless you're all really wanting to come together to practice this type of change, it's just you're just going to get dragged. Yeah. So I don't want to be dragged anymore. Like I've spent a lot of decades in my life feeling that, and I don't need that anymore. So if I can do this, and I think one of the keys of this that I looked at, because I'd served healthcare in my nursing agency days, is that 1,000 leaders at least have done this in one hospital. So one hospital organisation, the Cleveland Clinic, has put 1,000 emerging leaders through this. So imagine the leaders they're going to become if they take this forward. And then the Stanford Children's Hospital is also doing it all through their whole leadership model. Colorado Children's Hospital. So when I saw that all these big hospitals are embracing this work, I thought,
I need to be involved.
Yeah, the type of humans that work in that type of space, I think if you see it, I would love to bring this to just families and to workplaces in Australia.
Well, think about it, right? Like, let's put it pretty plainly. As parents, we're leaders to our children.
Yeah.
We all are leaders in our own lives, with our children, with our families. You know, if we do the work, they might not identify it straight away, but eventually it's going to leave an impact, and it's going to help them, help us, help them, help the next generation. It's not just about us in this moment, it's about the next day, the next month, the next year. I just think you're right. It's like, if they're doing it over there for their leadership groups, then, you know, us as parents, we're the best leaders our children have.
And if you can practice it at work or practice it anywhere else, and then it just becomes common language. And I remember when I was first working with the team in Hong Kong, and they were like, oh, it's called TED. Okay, so we call it the Empowerment Dynamic Triangle. So that's TED. He said, gosh, we're TEDing all over each other. And they felt really silly at first. And then they started to get with the groove of it. And it just became, there was no calls into the vice principal's office anymore to complain about something. Everyone started seeing what they were interacting like. So it's how you're engaging with other people. And if you can pull yourself up on how you engage with someone, and you can go, oh, hold on, I better stop for a minute. What am I doing here? Am I trying to one-up them? Am I trying to show I'm better than them? Am I trying to do whatever language you put to that? And say, well, instead, could we look at it from a place of, what are we trying to learn from this? Like, you and I just learnt about a technical glitch. So we both just got challenged by a technical glitch on this podcast.
Yeah,
you know?
we did.
But we walked through it. Like, it wasn't going to, you didn't shut down the podcast and go, oh my God, drama. We just went, oh, let's move forward.
Give it a go. Let's give it another go. Yeah. So for anyone listening at home, we had a technical glitch. We're not sure if it's fixed yet, but we're just going ahead anyway. It would be interesting. And I want to move on to the next question. But the last thing I was just thinking is, imagine if police officers did this.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, because honestly, looking back on my 10 years in the police, I was not emotionally empowered enough in my job. Like, I'm an emotionally intelligent human. I use my intuition. I use all of these things, but there's so much I've learned since leaving that I could have used in the police that I should have been taught.
I know. And I think it's that's probably one of the dicier careers to talk about with this, because I know a family member of mine joined the police force, and I don't know what he would do. I don't think he'd be able to embrace this work. But
you get massive criticism.
Yeah.
But by the old crusty sergeants, you know you are ones. But yeah, it would get criticised by the people who didn't like change, and there's a lot of them in the police force.
Yeah,
but there's also the next generation that could really use this to help them in the job. Because if I hadn't have burnt out with PTSD, I might still be there. Not that I'm like, I look back and I go, I'm glad that I'm not, but at the same time, like, I didn't want to leave. I was forced to leave. And
really?
through my mental health and through, it was a necessary thing that I had to do. But at the same time, and it wasn't the police who forced me to leave, by the way. I've spoken about this on the podcast. My daughter at 11 and a half, nearly 12 years old, said, Mum, you're not the same parent I remember. Like, you're not my mum, the same mum I don't want you to do this anymore. And I went and resigned the next day. So
okay.
Because and it was probably, and this is me in a nutshell, I very much like, once the decision's made, but it was already causing so many problems in my family life and it does, all of this stuff it affects every relationship you have.
Well, you talk about the ripple effect, like that's a negative ripple effect, where if you actually change the way you were operating to becoming from a different perspective and practicing that, and your child could see that you were really authentically being this, you're not pretending to try, you're just saying, hey, I'm actually trying to communicate in a different way, which I've had to say to my own daughters, because I can easily play silent mum. That was me from silent child. I can drop back into that when my depression kicks in or my PTSD takes me down a little bit of a rabbit hole every so often. So I have to pull myself back up out of that. And I've said to the girls over time, so if you don't mind, I might sound a bit weird sometimes, but I'm trying to practice speaking differently and thinking differently. So I'm quite open about what I'm trying to do, because I don't get it right, so it's okay not to get it right. But I just used to think, if I had this in my own, say, my business, and I was supplying, I think we supplied something like 6,000 nurses to hospitals and nursing homes over the time we owned that company. I thought, imagine if I sent all those people in on all those shifts and they had this model. Yeah. And then they would have impacted the site's staff in a healthy way. And then what's the ripple effect out to the patient and their family?
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. So
it's life-changing for a lot of people. And that's what I see in my work in prevention work is like, my thought process when I wrote my book or when I started talking and speaking about this outside of the police was like, it's just one child, right? But it's one child, one family, one community. It just keeps flowing out and flowing out, and things change. And that's what you're doing in a different way.
Yeah.
Same but different.
Yeah.
So you talk about the silent child stuff and the silent voice and like how you pull away and you just stay silent. Obviously over your journey, you've reclaimed some of that.
Yeah. And I think it was also just taking the time to look back. I think you've got to stop and look back and see that that's what you were. And there's a book, I think his name is, I'm going to forget his name now. Oh, have I got it here somewhere? Michael Lew, L-E-W. And he talks about finding your voice. And when I read that, I think, oh my gosh, okay. So that was real too. So I had lost my voice. And, as children, we were told to be silent, not speak unless we're spoken to.
Yeah.
And then I stayed silent because I was knocked back in a disclosure as a child, told to go and sort it out myself. So I felt alone. And then, then I, moved into years, and you definitely don't speak up. There's more that you numb. And I definitely numbed with alcohol just to not be seen, not to fit in, not to, be excluded, everything, that mixture of confusion that I hadn't addressed any of this stuff yet. But it was as I moved through, there was things that was happening in our family that we had to play happy families after I disclosed as an adult. So it was like, don't disturb the peace, don't lose love. So I did that, and then a situation came and I went lying in the sand. See ya. I'm gone. So I left and protected my children from any abuse happening. But it was like I had to keep on trusting that there was a voice in me that was me, that person from before. And it was so lovely to let that blossom. Definitely loads of self-doubt and all that type of stuff as I've gone through. But I became a leader that I didn't know I had that in me, and, learnt to be a leader of a team. But doing that without resolving my trauma, mind you. Like I hadn't actually dealt with the trauma. I was doing that with this PTS beneath the surface and all of that. And I think it's become, as I moved through to the end of that phase and became a coach, which you coach yourself when you do that, became this 3VQ facilitator, did the healing, did a lot of writing, a lot of research on sibling sexual abuse. Yeah, that gave me back my voice. And I keep reminding myself now I've got to lead and not follow people. I've got to actually be the leader, not feel like I have to follow anyone else's path.
Well, and we all get trapped in that where we think we're not good enough or we're not worthy enough or who are we to speak up about this stuff or even I do, But that's the thing, like this is your journey, your experience. You're the expert in your own life. So no one else can tell you whether what you did or how, no one can.
No.
But I think from my experience investigating sibling sexual abuse, I didn't see a lot of it come through my door unless it was historical. Or so historically they'd come back and say, look, this happened to me. I want to do something about it now. Or it was a child who was currently being abused by a sibling or a step sibling would disclose to someone like a mandatory reporter or a friend, and they tell their parents, and then that was reported to police. And one of the things that I don't think is that's why I want to have these conversations and why I want to open them up is because a lot of kids out there are being harmed in their own homes by siblings or by family members, and it's not their fault that they're being abused, but we're not supporting them. We're not keeping them.
No, and I've given you another little an excerpt from there's a really cool report. A review that was done by Dr. Ellie Hansen for NSPCC learning. So I've given you the link. You're welcome to share.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, but it talks about it. So it talks about the prevalence, recognition, the age, the power dynamics, parental misunderstanding. And it's a really simple one-pager. I thought I'll give you something at least that's about that. Because I'm running conversation cafes with survivors, with parents, very inclusive. If someone who's harmed is wanting to come along to that, they're going to be welcome, but it might be tricky for them to feel comfortable with that. We've got social workers coming to it. But what I'm witnessing when I'm sitting there facilitating this screen full of people is if a social worker will just suddenly decide that they're going to share what it's like to talk to the child who harmed, because she's working with the child who harmed and the children who were harmed. We all just sit there, the survivors, and go, no one's talked to us about this.
Right.
There's been no conversation ever on this. So we've all got to our 50s and 60s and we're having our first conversations ever about the impact on our intimacy. Surely it would impact your intimate relationship.
100%.
The addictions, so much. But no one's had the conversations. So we're trying to start having the conversations now. And it's all sort of happened out of COVID times, interestingly. Everyone, I think, sat with their big missions and went, it's time I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Time I spoke up. And there's all these books coming out of the woodwork in the States for sure. There's tons of memoirs coming and,
I know Dr. Amanda Patton has done some harmful sexualized behaviours interviews with both, the child that's been harmed and the child that's harming, and that's the language we use in the harmful sexualized behaviour framework. Look, I'd imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'd imagine most people, survivors, lived experience would wished that they don't. Like, you don't hate. I'm trying to get the right frame of how to say this. Maybe I'll just blurt it out there and you can correct me. You don't hate your sibling or whoever's doing it when you're a child, right? You don't hate them. You just want it to stop. You just want it to end. You don't want them to do it anymore. It's not okay. But there's your parent that's meant to keep you safe and is doing nothing because obviously they don't have the framework or the tools, or they're ignoring the problem. And so you're left high and dry, and this person's still doing it. And it's not until you become an adult and you realize how neglected and abused you were, like not just by the perpetrator, the person who is abusing you, but the parent as well. That's where the pain is really hard, is because that person should have stopped it, should have protected you, you might have been able to move on a little bit simpler, a little bit easier. Maybe not. Maybe it would have, who knows? But
yeah.
I just think there's so much we need to say in this because it's not being spoken about. Like I said, I didn't see those cases until they were historical, and the person's like, I fucking hate them. I fucking want them to pay. They ruined my life, that kind of thing.
I know. I think there's a lot to be said from the adult mind when we're looking at it from adults looking backwards. Definitely during the time of it, there's, to me, and I know there's other people that I've heard speak of it who will be different. They've got different perspective, and there's been different, actions taken against them by the person who harmed them. So there's all sorts of scope of that. It might have been once off. It might have been a feeling of love, or it might have been something that made you feel like you were part of something even. Yeah. So there's all sorts of, we can't really generalize it down into too close. And there's also all the different parents. There's parents who've walked in and opened the door, seen it and closed the door and walked away because possibly it's happened to them before as well. So there's that type of thing. I just think I definitely tried to get my mother's attention with it. I know once my father asked, where are your brother and sister? And he said, I remember you saying, and this is where I knew what age it started. He said, I remember you saying, they're in on the bed. And he said, I remember looking at you thinking, that's an odd thing to say. But he was just determined to get the family in the car, to get the boat down the boat ramp and just get out for the day. So he didn't think to do something, but that was a moment that he could have done something.
I also think the choice to be naive. Yeah.
And that was probably, I was 29, and they just said, you got no chance. It's historical. You're not going to have any evidence. Don't bother. But that was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Corruption in the 80s.
Yeah. It's changed. A lot's changed. I mean, I've done a lot of historical cases, like lots. Yeah. And generally there's a lot to it. Like, if someone comes forward, it's an uphill battle for a lot of survivors and for people who want to report to police. It's an uphill battle. I'm not going to in no way, shape or form say, yeah, go do it. It's easy.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I will say is that I have prosecuted and I have charged people with offences from 30, 40, 50, 60.
Oh, really?
Years ago.
Wow.
Even historical as 5 years ago. So, it can be any age. I think the longest charges, like they were from the 50s. So I have charged people from that far back. So, and it is possible to do that. So it's just about, it can be the police that you speak to. It's with whether you are like what you can like provide to police. Historical cases, in general, it's he said, she said, or she said, or whatever. But, there's always ways to confirm things like with a historical case, it would be getting the statement. And say, for instance, someone said, we were living in this house and this time, and it was around my 10th birthday. And I remember it because this is what happened. Because you know what it's like. Well, I'm generalizing, sorry, is, for some people, they can remember the first offense and maybe the last offense and maybe some offenses in between, but they don't remember everything because it all blurs together. It all mushes together.
It's quite blurry when it's over a bunch of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can pick out 1 or 2 or even 10, however many, it has to be able to be identifiable for a reason. So for instance, I had historical offences where they'd say, I remember it was my 10th birthday because I got this dress and I was wearing this dress when it happened. This is where we were. So then I would as the investigator, it was my job to go, okay, who can corroborate that? Who can give evidence that at this time they were living at this address? Or is there records from the rates that they paid? So I used to go hunting through paperwork, basically. It was always paper-based, hunting through paperwork, hunting through statements and bank statements, and then, hunting through other witnesses or potential witnesses saying, do you remember living at this address? Or do you remember, and that's how I was able to, confirm that they were there at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how it works.
It's possible. Okay.
It is possible. I know.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realise that. And it's one of the worst things about, I think, that police have done is because it's hard work, they don't try.
No. Okay. And it probably would have been easier back then to have done it when I was 29.
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, a lot of things are digitised now. A lot of things are easy to find. You'd be surprised. Like I had one case years ago that, they'd said that they remembered that they were living because they had moved a lot, right? So they remembered they were at this school and they were doing this school because we lived across the road from this school. And so they remembered that and that it happened around this period. So I was able to go back through school records and prove that they were at this school at this time and that it aligned with basically when they said it happened. So that's so there you go. Yeah,
okay. I imagine you could, you just got me picturing off little moments that you think, gosh, you'd have to then go and see where they are. And also that I wasn't alone in what was happening. So
no.
It just mattered whether someone actually wanted to speak up or not. Yeah.
So in regards to everything that we've talked about today, what would be one message that you would want to leave with the parents that are listening or the people that are listening? What's one thing that you want to leave them with?
And I think I took it from being at a national conference last year. It's just to be the person that believes them. Know that they can actually come to you and you've said to them, you can tell me anything, anytime. And, that was corroborated with another advocate I spoke to this morning. She said that's what she is to her nieces and nephews now because she's been through this.
Yeah.
And so she said, just know always. And so to be saying that and actually honouring that, I think is important. But I think education of yourself is important.
Yeah.
Because in a time of disclosure, my mum didn't go well with disclosure. It was pretty rotten when I was 25. And that shattered hers and my relationship for a very long time. So whatever you say in the moment is going to be remembered and is going to go to every part of that woman that is disclosing to you, the child, the harmed child, the teenager, the young mum she might be. So just educate. There's really cool sites like RAIN in America, RA. I think there's some there's a Kids Safe Australia thing or something, Raising Safe Children or something like that in Australia. They've got some really cool one-pagers. Just educate yourself because if it comes up, you want to be that person that go, oh, thank God I told her or him.
Yeah. And listen and believe. Like some of the disclosures I got over the years where they went to tell someone and they were shut down or told not to, that leaves such a large impact on the whole,
for sure,
life of that person. And I've said it over and over again. It's not for you to decide whether it's happened or not. It's for you to support the person who comes to you.
Exactly. And I think the part that I can't think who it was a leader, one of the commissioners I think spoke about this. And she said that be the person who believes and you don't have to be the investigator.
No.
In that moment, it's not for you to investigate. You just have to be there. Investigation can come later. So don't expect to have to take action in that minute. Just be quietly present, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to finish on, I think, Susan.
Yeah.
Look, I reckon we could talk about this for hours.
Yes.
But if anyone wants to find out about the framework that you work on, the 3VQ framework, or anything about what you've talked about in this episode, where can they find you?
Well, my email, I can give that to you. So I'm connect@susandunlop.com.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, and your other website is susandunlop.com.au.
Yeah, and that's more interesting. That's my leadership training, because there's also, unfortunately, there's leaders who don't really want to know that you might have had a trauma background. So I've got two.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And a lot of people don't actually, they might not want to, recognize that there's trauma involved. I mean, even with the police, honestly, for all the people that they see and we saw, we didn't have enough trauma-informed training. I'm sure it's improved in the last 5 years since that trauma-informed, buzzword has come out. But it impacts every part of people's lives, every part. And so we have to have this education around how it manifests, how it shows up, how it can affect the people and in our own work lives, in our personal lives, in every part of our life.
The restaurants are closing tomorrow, as in your business is shutting down tomorrow.
Yeah.
I remember calling each of my daughters and said, this is unprecedented. We've never had this. So do you understand this is quite a change in history to be getting told we're going to be locking down? So I think there's been so many micro and macro traumas since that time. Yeah. We just started to get used to a low level of stress anyway in our lives. And now we've just got this a little bit more. So we've got to take care of ourselves a little bit because, again, as I say, the kids are watching us. Yeah. So, we need to be there for them. And so that means taking care of ourselves first.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you so much for all of the technical stuff and all of the other stuff, but thank you so much for being here. I will make sure everything you've shared with me is in the show notes. So if anyone's looking for any of that, it will be there and all your links will be there. So
fantastic.
Amazing.
Thank you, Kristi, for making the time to have a chat.
Always.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Education empowers children, strengthens parents, and most importantly, prevents abuse. That's why I do this work, and that's why you're here. So truly, thank you. If you'd like more support or resources, follow me on social media under Kristi McVie or Cape-AU, where you'll find all the links in the show notes. You can also grab a copy of my book, Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention at www.cape-au.com, where you'll find further resources and self-paced courses to help you in this journey of protecting your kids. If you found this episode valuable, please take a moment to leave a review or share it with someone important. Your support helps more parents and caregivers discover this important information and take action to keep kids safe. Check the show notes for extra links and support, and most importantly, thank you for showing up and taking action to protect your kids. See you next time.